Hi, today is the day uh, after Christmas, the 26th of December, 2017. I'm Paul Glumaz. I'm active with the movement of Lyndon LaRouche, and this is being brought to you by General Welfare Presents. Now, I'm going to discuss with you my uh, strong feelings of worry. Uh, I guess you could say worry is a form of a feeling. Being worried. I am very worried. Um, as we enter the new year, I am very worried about the situation which is unfolding, uh, in which we have a great opportunity to change world history right now. But at the same time, we are very close to an all-out war, most likely nuclear war. And I'll go into a little bit of the situation. Um, there are signs of an escalated U.S. Involvement in Ukraine. Um, Anti-tank missiles are being sent to Ukraine, which are going to increase the ability of the Nazi Ukrainian government to launch attacks on the parts of the Ukraine which have broken away. This is an escalation of the war. Also, there's massive increase of activity by NATO on the border of Russia. It's even gone so far as the Lithuanian government has claimed that the very fact that the Russians are building a huge nuclear power plant in the neighboring country of Belarus as a national security threat. There are articles all over the media about the plans of Russia to invade Europe. Russia is about ready to invade Europe hysteria going on in the British press and in the European press generally, and in some of the U.S. press as well. Uh, there is this absolute hysteria going on about Russia's getting ready to invade. Um, then there are signs in the Middle East that the U.S. is not leaving Syria, but is regrouping with the leftover of ISIS. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, but there are signs, and that they'll be working with the Saudis and Israel for another round of operations in Syria and Iraq. So whether this is true or not, I don't know, but we have a situation where the United States has made Iran the primary adversary, as yet Iran is not does not sponsor state terrorism, and if they did, it was a long, long, long time ago. So Iran is the bad guy now. So does this mean that there's going to be a coalition of Israel and the Gulf states coming together to confront Iran? And this is all, is this what was involved in Trump's thing on Jerusalem? Is he setting up a situation where he can use that to force the an Israeli-Palestine solution, and then bring the Gulf countries into an alliance with Israel against Iran? I don't know. I hope not, because that's just a continuation of the mess that's been going on all this time. Um, then you go to North Korea. That situation seems to be escalating. Now, the common denominator in all these situations, whether it's North Korea or the situation in the Middle East with Israel and Saudi Arabia and all of that, and the situation in Ukraine, is that these things are key to propping up the United States power in the world. Because the United States did something very stupid over the last 40 years. The United States deindustrialized and became a service economy. They are no longer a self-sustaining, full-set industrial economy. They depend on China, they depend on other nations for their manufactured goods. What the United States primarily provides is services, IT services, and other kinds of services. And except for the military element and the aerospace element, the United States is not a full-set industrial country. It produces a lot of food for export, and it produces a lot of oil for export. These are raw materials and so forth. Now, the problem is this, is that if those situations were resolved, and the Ukraine situation was resolved, then there's no need to have this adversarial relationship in Europe towards Russia. And there's no way to keep the European countries into an embargo and into an anti-Russian under the European Union. And there would be no way for Russia not to become economically integrated into the rest of Europe, along with Eastern Europe, and there's no way that that's would follow. And they don't want that. They don't want China's Belt and Road coming into Europe. They don't want the well-being of the European nations to develop. Under the European Union, the actual living standards of the average European has gone down dramatically in Germany, in France, in Italy, in Spain, and more in Greece. And all these Eastern European countries, which had thought that they were going to benefit by being members of the European Union, have found that they've been treated more like Mexicans get treated here, in terms of labor, and worse. So they're not happy with the European Union. The European Union is in deep trouble. And the only thing holding it together, and NATO together, is this adversarial relationship with Russia. And the way that adversarial relationship was jacked up was by having a Nazi coup in Ukraine. And then all this propaganda about, Crimea and Putin and all this is all propaganda to keep that divide, because that divide is what holds it together. And now we have the situation with Iran. What was Iran used for primarily? Iran's alleged nuclear program was the reason for why allegedly you had to protect Europe from a potential nuclear attack from Iran. So all of the anti-ABM systems that were set up on the border in Romania and on the border with Russia are designed supposedly to prevent Iranian attack. But the Iranians didn't develop nuclear weapons. This was all part of preparing for a war-winning first strike against Russia. And the same thing with North Korea. North Korea is the excuse. We're going to be hit with missiles from North Korea. We got to set up this ABM system on South Korean soil with the THAAD missiles, right? And the radar that goes with that. And that radar is, again, it's not designed for dealing with North Korea, because North Korea isn't going to attack South Korea with missiles. It can attack South Korea with artillery. It doesn't need to launch missiles at South Korea. It might launch missiles at Japan. But so allegedly we're established. So all these situations are pretexts to maintain divisions, but also to maintain the potential for a war-winning first strike against Russia, China, nuclear first strike against Russia and China. However, Russia and China are developing very fast. They're developing China's developing industrially. But Russia is not trying to match the United States in military technology. They're trying to develop certain key advanced defensive technologies so that they can, because they don't want to be caught in a situation where the United States might be tempted, because they figured out that they could win a nuclear war. They don't want to be tempted, have the U.S. tempted to launch a first strike against Russia and China. So this is where we are. It's a very worrisome situation. There is massive military activity going on under the which is not being reported, and the question is, will the United States go ahead and launch a preemptive nuclear war against Russia, or will Russia launch a preemptive nuclear war against the U.S., thinking that the United States has decided to launch a preemptive nuclear war, or any of the above combinations? Are not we're not out of the woods on that. Even though Donald Trump indicated he wanted to have better relations with Russia, those better relations have not materialized. In fact, they've gotten worse. And the security doctrine that Trump read, while he did ameliorate it somewhat, the wording, it is a confrontational document. It is a war. It is we're at war with Russia document. We're at war with Russia and China document. So this is a very, and then an executive order was passed granting the Treasury Department and the right to seize and block all assets of individuals deemed to be violators of human rights, and this could be anybody. So this is also ominous because they could target anybody in the world who has money in the U.S. or inside accounts of other nations, which are subject to can be subject to sanctions or confiscation. So this is all very very problematic. Now, the whole thing that's occurred is that relations have not improved with Russia because we have Russiagate, and everyone is saying Russia interfered with the elections. All the Democrats, all the Republicans are saying yes, Russia interfered with the elections. Russia did not interfere with the elections. But when you have all the top people in the country, all the elite of the country saying that Russia interfered with the elections, what's going on? Well, what's going on is that they're afraid that if they go ahead and say Russia did not interfere with the elections, the whole edifice of the political system will collapse because everything has been put into this idea that Russia is the bad guy, Russia is manipulating the elections. So while that is part of their attempt to get Trump, but it's also part of creating an environment where Trump cannot have better relations with Russia, and de facto we end up in a war, a nuclear war, or what have you. Now, why would people want a nuclear war, or why would they want to have that kind of situation? Well, I'm not saying that these people would want to have a nuclear war, but they're looking at a very frightening situation. The European oligarchy and their American counterparts are looking at a situation where they have destroyed the productive power of Europe and the United States, relatively speaking. China is growing very fast. China is going into a massive industrialization mode as they build all over the world. China is investing very heavily in Africa because Africa is the place where you can make an explosive development in Africa. If you put in the rail and the water projects in Africa, you're going to triple, quadruple, quintuple the food supply of the world because Africa is potentially the biggest breadbasket in all human history and geographically the greatest breadbasket. And you're going to need all that food to feed the people that are and give them a better standard of living. Give them a much better diet. You're going to have to produce a lot more food. And so all of this is connected to the future of development, which the Chinese are playing a key role. But the orientation of that development is what Xi Jinping calls win-win, or we call the new paradigm, where nations actually work together on a mutual beneficial project. You're not thinking in terms of who's the conqueror and who's the conquered. Who's the boss and who's not the boss. So everyone's saying, well, if we allow China to help us develop, then that means we are under the control of the Chinese. They're the empire and we're the conquered. That's the way people think. That's the way we've done things, right? We go into a country, we put them into debt to the IMF, and then we extract what we want from them for virtually nothing. That's our method of doing it. So obviously, if we're going to let the Chinese do anything, well, obviously that means we're under control of the Chinese, and isn't that terrible? But the Chinese aren't trying to loot anybody. They're trying to develop. What's wrong with that? Well, that's very bad. It's Chinese. Don't you understand? The Chinese want to rule the world. Don't you understand that? Well, of course, you should understand that, because we've been trying to rule the world, and therefore we're not. If we're trying to rule the world and we're not, and we're no longer ruling the world, then who is going to rule the world? Well, it's going to be the Chinese. Of course, we don't want that, do you? And that's the paradigm that we're dealing with, the old paradigm, and so forth. Now we have a problem. That Trump is probably not as afflicted with this mentality as those who are around him, as the institutions. And how do you get these institutions to realize that, hey, the United States can develop, China can develop, every country in the world can develop, but no, you can't have that. We have to have we have to suppress development. We have to have a balance of power, between, you only can develop so far, we only develop so far, and we have a balance. It's not everyone's getting developed together. And this is a real problem, because this is the mentality that we're dealing with, and it doesn't matter who Trump picks as to be in his cabinet. I mean, they all have that mentality. McMaster, for sure. I won't even discuss Nikki Haley. I mean, that woman's something else. And but they all have this idea that if if we're not top dog, then we're bottom dog. We're chow. And this mentality is really going to get us into a nuclear war if people don't realize that we have to work together. And we have to work together because we need each other. The Chinese need us, and we need them. We need them because we didn't do our job. We didn't do what we should have been doing all along, which is developing the world and increasing our productive industrial capabilities doing that. We wouldn't be in a service economy. We wouldn't have all these people on drugs right now. We wouldn't have all these people who were once blue collar without jobs. We wouldn't have any of this. We'd be much more prosperous society. 2 or 3 times, at least. You wouldn't have people, feeling, like they're losers, and there's no hope in life. You wouldn't have vast sections of our population feeling that way. And then our soldiers coming back from these wars, from Afghanistan and from Iraq, and they know what we're doing. We're supporting terrorism. We're training the terrorists to go around butchering people and everything, and then we're pretending that we're at war with the terrorists. How do you think our men in uniform think about our country, think about our leadership, when they can see for their own eyes what a criminal operation we're running, protecting the opium fields in Afghanistan? Yeah, that's why I'm here. I'm here to protect the opium fields in Afghanistan so people back home can have their heroin. Yeah, that's why I'm going to die. I'm going to die for the heroin that's being sent to my country. Yeah, I mean, people know this, people have a sense of that. And it demoralizes them. Our military is very demoralized. It's brutal. These people coming back, a large part of them have PTSD. They have nightmares every night, and then they have to go do another tour of duty. I mean, this is hell. Our military is living in hell, and we're expanding. We're going to double down. We're going to increase our military activity all over the world. Why? Because if we don't, it's the end of our empire. Well, you didn't have you have a rotten, stinking mess. It's not an empire. I mean, you might have thought you had an empire, but you hollowed it out. You carved it out. You got everything cheap overseas, right? Now you got to pay the price. You got to change. You got to develop. So that's the hard part, and we have to do this. We have to get Donald Trump, on January 30th, when he gives a State of the Union message, to come out with an actual realistic economic policy based on Glass-Steagall, infrastructure, and the credit system, and advanced scientific technological development, and to work with China, especially in a partnership for that. Work with them, on that, because that's where they're going. And that's what we have to get Trump to do, because this infrastructure program that he's planning to announce is probably not going to be any good. It's not unified. It doesn't have a master plan. It's this project over here. It's that project over here. Everybody's fighting for the money, and it's not a master plan. It's not yet perhaps a concept of developing the whole economy, and that's the only way that the United States is going to survive. They're not going to survive by playing the same old games, that are being played, And in the meantime, everybody's happy that the tax reduction is occurring, and it's going to cost another a trillion or two or three or four and more debt. But so what? That's good. So what? Who cares about that? Because it's going to give the money to the people to bail out the banks. It's going to give money to the corporations to prop up more debt. It's going to cut back on the taxes people have to pay, so they have more money to spend. But that's not going to change fundamentally the economic the system that we're in, and it's only going to ultimately make the crash even bigger when it comes, and the crash is coming. And what it'll trigger it, who knows? Bitcoin, which is another scam, corporate debt blowout, consumer debt blowout, student debt blowout, another mortgage debt blowout, corporate bond debt blowout. I mean, it's all one bubble after another propping it up, but you can't get the money into the real economy. Well, some of it is going to consumer, but that's not. We're talking about infrastructure and development. We're not doing that. And there is a process of attrition. There's a process of the wearing out of our infrastructure. You look at this thing that happened here in Washington State a week and a half ago. Actually, a week ago. This thing with the they wanted to make a big show of a little bit of faster track, and they put in a little bit of a new track. And the thing, and the Lakewood mayor said, "Look, this is not an accident about to happen." He said, "This is an accident that will happen. You can't do this. You can't put lipstick on a pig and say you're doing something," which is what the Obama administration was doing. And they did, and they had an accident, a huge accident. You can't do it. You got to build an entirely new high-speed rail system. You can't just take some old system and put some duct tape on it and say you've done something. It doesn't work. We have a decay and attrition of our infrastructure. We're going to have to leapfrog scientifically, technologically, and in every which way. And we don't have people in our institutions who have a clear conception of how to do that. LaRouche knows how to do that. Our movement knows what you have to do. But we don't see that out there. The Chinese are doing it, and others are now starting to do it, but the United States has not woke up yet. And that's the process that we're in right now. We have to wake up the United States on the significance of the fact that the United States has to undergo a profound economic change. And to do that, you need to have Glass-Steagall and a credit system and all of that, and Trump has to better be prepared to do that, and he better outline a policy that's actually going to work on the 30th when he gives the State of the Union message, so this is what is driving for war, because when you are this dilapidated and you see China moving, developing, you see Russia sort of getting off the floor increasingly, and you see other nations developing with China, and you're not developing. Then what are you going to do? You're going to change, or you're going to develop, or are you going to nuke? Change, develop, or nuke. Either change or nuke. That's essentially the situation that we're going into right now, and this is why I'm very worried. I'm concerned. I'm concerned that all of this anti-Trump stuff has made it much harder for Trump to be able to deal with this paradox that has to be resolved. I mean, our country has to change.